I'll make it extremely brief. Thank you for inviting me here this morning. I actually don't have as much, I don't have any quantitative data to present to you this morning. So I was asked by some of your colleagues to actually thank you, to be here to actually to talk a little bit about what we're doing at HPD regarding about getting it to the streets. So a lot of this quantitative data was actually interesting for me to hear because I know a lot of the work that you guys are doing in rent stabilization is a big topic as we go out into the communities and do neighborhood planning. So I'll tell you what my office is doing. So as a result of the housing plan that was passed in May by the mayor's administration this past year, one of the big moves in that plan was to create the Office of Neighborhood Strategies. And I am the first person to be the deputy commissioner for that office. And so it's an honor, and it feels like at the sort of maybe the major big point in my own career, it sort of brings a lot of my past together. So I'll start by just telling you a little about who I am and what I bring to the position and what then the office actually does. I started my career as a affordable housing developer in San Francisco, another city constantly dealing with rents, affordability, changing neighborhoods, community dynamics, so building affordable housing there was a great way to get my teeth sunk into community organizing as well as the issues that face livability and affordability in really high-cost cities. As I continued to do that, I was asked to then work on various projects around the country during the big Hope 6 movement that under the Clinton administration. So I financed and refinanced a lot of public housing around the country, and I work with municipalities and public housing authorities. It landed me here in New York ultimately, and I ended up working for Jonathan Rowe's companies for several years. We were a small, you know the Rose family, but Jonathan's office was up in Katona for many years, and there was like 4 of us. But now he has a large office here in Midtown, and doing affordable housing still, as well as mixed use and mixed income housing. During the time I was there, I created with Jonathan a planning division, and the planning division was what sort of, again, the pinnacles of my career. I love the idea of thinking about the community dynamics from sort of the social dynamics of neighborhoods, but also the economic dynamics of neighborhoods. Again, what makes it affordable, why people choose to live in certain places, and what development you might think about to make great neighborhoods. So as a result of creating the planning division and within the company, I continued the work with municipalities, mayors, public housing authorities, economic development agencies in various parts of the country. I left there, opened my own firm, and then Vicki Bean found me. And I think she just got I have no idea how she found my name actually, but it was fun to meet with her and talk through her through the summer after the plan was passed to come and work for HPD to begin the Neighborhood Strategies Office. So that's all to say that my background is really both in development as well as community organizing, as well as understanding sort of what people live, how people think about home, and why they choose certain places to live in neighborhoods. So the Office of Neighborhood Strategies has 3 elements to it. I oversee the inclusionary housing program. And as all of you know, we're about to release the policy for the mandatory inclusionary housing. So I won't talk too much about it because I'm told not to quite yet. To be clear and honest about that, the policy is actually still being massaged, so it would be inappropriate for me to sort of release anything without it actually being completely vetted. But the good news about the vetting process is that we hired a firm called Bay Area Economics, a firm actually that I had worked with in San Francisco. They're based in Oakland, but they work around the country working with cities on creating inclusionary housing policies. So they're a strong economic team and understand the dynamics and the politics of passing inclusionary housing policies. But their focus here with us in New York City was specifically on understanding the economic dynamics of development and operating housing. And so their charge was really to understand how projects get developed in New York, what are the financial feasibility targets, moments, the expected rates of return in New York City, and how we might think about creating an inclusionary housing policy that would work. So they looked at various markets. Many of the markets they worked in, including San Francisco, Denver, and others, those markets are fairly monochromatic across the city, but New York is almost about 5, 6 different type of economic dynamics that would happen in different places. So it was not an easy undertaking in that it wasn't one size fits all sort of economic analysis. So we had to split the city up into marketplaces to understand development dynamics in those different marketplaces. So when we actually come, hopefully back to you, you'll invite us to make a presentation on what that economic analysis looked like and how it helped inform the policy. And I think inform is an important word here. It was not meant to drive the policy, but it was meant to be able to understand the underpinnings of the viability of an inclusionary housing program here. So anyway, we'll be rolling that out. As you can imagine, the policy is informed by politics, communities, and the viability of it actually getting passed. So a lot of the discussions we have are with developers. We sit in tables like this. What ifs, don't do that, whatever. So we've been through a lot of discussions with various stakeholders, again, both at the community level as well as the developers building many of the buildings here in New York City. So that's mandatory inclusionary housing. Last year, it was the division is managed by Assistant Commissioner Louise Carroll. She's worked at HPD for many years, and she started out with 2 people. It's grown to 7. They've exceeded their expectations in the current inclusionary housing program, which is a voluntary program in various zones, planning zones here in New York City. So talking about planning zones, the other office I oversee is called planning. So much of the work is work that you probably know that we do. The planners in that division actually oversee the ULERP process. So my office sends out RFPs. We get responses back. We select a developer. The program for that development is negotiated with the developer, and we go through a ULERP process to pass it. Well, that's what the planning division did. Still does that aggressively, assertively, especially if we're trying to reach our 200,000 unit goals each year. Working toward that 200,000, we're continuing to get out RFPs. In fact, this year you'll see more RFPs coming out of both HDC and EDC, and we're collaborating closely to do that. But how planning has expanded is we're doing neighborhood planning. So this is how many of you have been hearing me talk about how neighborhood planning is evolving and changing in New York City because of the housing plan. So we're working closely with DCP as well, and I think we get a lot of criticism, rightfully so, about not doing it so well yet. So what we did is we asked a couple of foundations, Ford Foundation and the Deutsche Bank Foundation, to fund a process for the 3 agencies, the major agencies that are out on the ground doing planning, on how we can do this better. Many of you may know and probably do know that, planning, community and neighborhood planning is not a science, it's more of an art, but there is a discipline around it in ways that you effectively engage communities. So we hired Gale Studios. They have an office here in New York. They're based in Copenhagen, but they're really well known for sort of creating human-centered environments and how you engage people in creating those human-centered places. They partnered with another corporation called Good Corporation. Some of you may know their magazine called Good Magazine. It's a cool magazine. But I found out about them because they had done an issue on city neighborhoods a few years ago that was an amazing magazine. So they're doing all of how agencies actually work together. They're a management consulting group. And then Good Studios is an urban design and planning group. So they're a great combination in helping 3 bureaucratic agencies, this is my first time in bureaucracy, by the way, but bureaucratic agencies on how they can effectively work together. So our governance structure, how we engage City Hall, because all this can get chaotic, as you can imagine. So a governance structure in the way that we work together in doing neighborhood planning. And then the neighborhood planning process itself. One of the criticisms we're getting from people is, you guys created a plan, and you're probably reading this about East New York specifically. You created a plan. We have no idea how you did that. We had meetings, but we didn't know that what we were saying was actually going to end up in a plan in some way. And how are you addressing, particularly, preservation in housing, rent-stabilized and rent-regulated units, the preservation of those, and in any new development you do, what income targets are you going to be financing? So they want very specific information, and unfortunately, those questions were sort of coming at the back end of when a plan was to be released. So there will most likely be some delays in the certification process for the ULURP, so we can actually effectively meet with the different groups who are asking these critical questions and do it in a way that meets the vision and goals of the community. So that's all to say that it's been a rough road since I've gotten there, but the community planning and the neighborhood planning is probably the critical element that's going to bring a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing, as well as HPD, EDC, and the city's big vision, the mayor's vision on building affordable housing in various neighborhoods. My office is charged with trying to get that, and I'm just saying, to the streets. But people and meeting their everyday needs and the livability in their neighborhoods. The third piece of that, which is helpful in getting it to the streets, is the other group that's called community partnerships in my office. And some of you may know Brent Meltzer, who I hired. He was doing legal services in Brooklyn for many years. I hired him to run the community partnerships program. And what they're doing is actually they're doing a lot of what they used to do, but it's expanding as well. So they do like tenant nights. What are your rights as tenants? What happens if? And who can you speak to? That plus who is doing home ownership counseling and or credit counseling for your own home so that you're up on bills, and so when you actually apply for a unit, either in the private market or through HPD, you're actually getting through the application process and you're successfully meeting the requirements to get into a unit. We're finding that a lot of people will enter into the lottery system, into our application process, and drop out because of some weird credit issue. And we're just trying to get people to have much more successful application processes. But what we're expanding into is actually being more affirmative in the way that we work with either legal services, tenant rights groups, but also with landlords. So I think the missing element that's happened at HPD is we had been in a really reactive state for many years, of what I've heard and have observed since I've been there, is that there's an existing rent-regulated building that had been financed through some old HUD 236 or whatever, just some old loan program, even some of ours, that is now the rent regulations are expiring. So oftentimes HPD would basically wait and see if the property owner was going to come to them, and they'd refinance them, which would re-establish the rent regulation, the regulatory agreement. What we want to do is, I'm sort of calling them date nights right now, where we're trying to figure out how to meet landlords, property owners on their own terms, where they are, the issues that's happening with their buildings, whether they're overly paying on utility bills because they haven't installed new systems in their building. There's structural problems, there's deferred maintenance problems, whatever, that we can bring financing to them so that their buildings can stay for a certain amount of time into a rent-regulated structure while meeting their operating needs. We think that those programs and the way that we're financing and thinking about the terms of the rent regulation terms is probably much shorter than when we're financing a new construction and it's major lift in financing. And these may be much smaller loans, which would then come with much less rent regulation terms. But at least we keep them in the building or in the system of rent-regulated units. So anyway, we're trying out different things. We're trying to meet landlords in these different areas where we're planning on doing neighborhood planning. And as you know, the mayor announced 6 different neighborhoods throughout the 5 boroughs where we'll be doing some neighborhood planning projects. So anyway, those are the 3 elements of my office. We're going crazy. It's an intense amount of time. So for better or for worse, the housing plan has gotten a lot of recognition. So it's been an interesting moment for HPD and particularly for my career in this particular position. But it's actually charged people, which is really exciting to sort of see that, I think that one of the best things that government can do is to tell communities, we want to engage you, rather than, have we got an idea for you? We're trying to change the dynamics of what is it, where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, and what are the tools that the government can bring to you in order to help build that future? So that's a very different dynamic than the old dynamic of we're going to rezone and replan this place. I think we're in the midst of trying to change that, and again, I'm basically going out and asking communities to be a little patient because it is a bureaucracy. There are old orthodoxies, and we're working to change them. So anyway, that's where we are right now. So I don't know if you have any questions about that.
I wish you a lot of luck.
I have a lot of energy.
Yeah, I do want to say, good luck with the balance between sort of the plotting and the methodical community organizing component, particularly, Jerome Avenue to Atlantic Avenue. But it seems like they're in contradistinction. The community-based planning process is slow, methodical. I mean, just even the old 197A plans, and just how ineffective the whole process was in the end. How are you going to balance that with this goal of building 80,000 units of housing? Yeah. So I don't know if you have to have the answer, but good luck with it.
Yeah, thank you. I do, actually, but yes.
And the other thing, I would encourage Deutsche Bank and Ford to broaden the conversation, to bring other players in philanthropy in, and to get the dollars out quickly to these organizations. That it shouldn't be just an elite club that has a certain seat at the table, because these 15 neighborhoods certainly need these dollars, and they need it quickly. That's.
Can if I can, I'd love to respond to that. So, my experience, I've done city plans and neighborhood plans for many years now. What my sort of mantra is that I'm just trying to be respectful of people's lives. No one wants to go to a Saturday. I mean, many people do, actually, but it's usually the people who are the community organizers want to go. Nobody wants to go to 5,000 meetings over 2 years to finally get a plan that who knows if it's going to get implemented. So my mantra is that I want to be respectful of people's lives, and particularly when we're working with low-income communities. People are working 2 jobs. They're having to worry about their daycare. Why do they want to go out on a Wednesday night and plan? So one, I want to make it so that it's engaging and people are actually talking versus us, the city, presenting to them. That's one. The second one is that I want to do it within I've also found that the more concentrated that you can make these planning efforts and be very clear about what you're doing at each phase of the planning process, then people know why they're there, what they're doing, and let's get this thing done. So anyway, that's part of the goal that we worked with when we hired the Good Gale team, was to try to make this in a concentrated, really aggressive, really assertive effort where we get the big issues out on the table and deal with them and identify which ones we can implement, and be really honest about what might be on the back burner because it's going to take major whatever, versus the stuff that we wanted to get done immediately. Yeah. Sure.
As a community organizer, I do experience many people really do want to be part of the planning process and don't mind coming to Wednesday night, Thursday nights, and Friday nights, even though they're their date nights. And so that sounds a little shocking to me, since when you were speaking about doing workshops and doing all of these things, I'm assuming they're happening when people are available, which is usually at night when they're not working. And so if childcare was provided, I'm sure you would probably have a different amount of turnout, interpretation also. So I would encourage you to look into those things, so that people are sort of really excited and riled up as you are about the planning process. I also wanted to ask you, exactly what are you doing in the rezoning areas or the study areas that you are looking at, and what have you identified? Which ones have you identified as at risk of gentrification, maybe, to use another, not trying to sugarcoat it. And then, like you said, workshops, where are they happening? When are they happening? Who's involved? How are they advertised? Because that's a big piece of how you engage communities. And I feel like if they're not, you yourself sort of acknowledge that you've gotten a lot of criticism about the planning process, and I want to understand exactly what your efforts are in order to see what are people saying.
Sure, and it sort of goes with Steve's question too, I think, about blending, the sort of the issues of the organizers and the advocate organizations, and then just people on the ground and people's everyday lives. What we're experiencing is actually, as everyone knows, the community advocates and organized groups have consolidated a lot of the concerns of the neighborhood, and they're actually able to speak on behalf of a lot of the issues that they know either are current and or forthcoming. So what we're trying to do is actually, and what I just had this conversation with Brent yesterday. We both just got back from a couple of travels, but he was on vacation and I was visiting family. But anyway, we might just say as a priority is that we wanted, in each of the neighborhoods, there's 6 neighborhoods that are identified right now. In each of those neighborhoods, we want to build sort of a network of people on the ground, community organizations on the ground, and charge them with, we know that you will be there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, but what about the people who are you talking about that need transportation, childcare, et cetera? What are some of the solutions that we can develop so that we can get everyday people to these meetings? And that's a really hard challenge because who does come are frequently the community advocates and the organizations. And we want to hear from the person walking down the sidewalk, and that's who we actually want to begin engaging in these conversations. That's much harder. And I think the other thing that we want to make clear as we develop these coalitions, I don't know what the word we want to use, but these partnerships with people, is that, we're at 100 Gold Street. We're not up on Jerome. We're not in East New York. These community organizations are. So what does the partnership look like that can be established so that there's a shared responsibility and commitment to creating this meaningful process, which then brings, which I forgot to answer, the relationship with the foundations and their interest. There's big interest right now that Ford and Deutsche, as a result of wanting us to sort of at least take on the responsibility at the government level of being able to engage communities well. Their interest in a longer strategy that talks about how do we build capacity on the ground so that we actually have community organizations that can meaningfully engage government as well. So I meet with them regularly to give the government perspective. There's other organizations meeting with them to give the community perspective. And there are groups that we'll bring to that table very soon. And again, because discussions are happening current, and we'll sort of begin talking about who those groups are that will begin sort of figuring out this longer term strategy of community development.
So another follow-up question. So if we see, so just so my definition of organizing is that the everyday people walking down the streets are the ones doing the organizing. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that they're two different
Totally
things.
Agree. Yep.
And so with that being said, I think that when we talk about a plan that's concise and sort of quickly moving, and we know communities and people who have a lot of things going on in their lives, mm-hmm. It's hard for them to engage, as you probably are aware, yeah. And sort of trying to address. Yeah. Then how do you make those two timelines sort of work together, yeah. To create a plan so that last minute you're not, yeah. Getting questions around what you've done and what people really thought they needed to see happen in the, yeah. Communities?
So again, this is where the two pieces, so the way I've been describing it is I'm not going to take on all the responsibility. I'm going to have my partners on the ground, the community organizers and advocates on the ground, take on shared responsibility. So, we're government, it's a bureaucracy, and I've been on this side. So there's the government and there's a community and there's a strategy to trying to meet in the middle. And I think that what's not happened so far in this process is what are the forums in which it can meet in the middle? And I think that shared responsibility, and that's why I said during my presentation that basically this administration said, we want to engage. That's much different than an administration said, we're going to do this. So once the role has, or the response, once the statement has been made that there is a commitment to engaging, then both parties have to figure out how to do that meaningfully. And so my goal is to create the forum in which those types of things can happen. I also think that there's different ways. I think I often go back to my own mom and dad when I think about these engagement processes. Like if my mom and dad saw a poster on economic development this Saturday, my dad would not know what that meant. But if we use language that everyday people use, then I think we can. And also my mom and dad would never raise their hand in a community meeting. And I know there's a lot of people like my mom and dad. So I think the strategy also needs to include other ways of engaging people besides these workshops that can be a little intimidating for some people. So anyway, so all of this stuff is what we're trying to do. We're going to try different things, and we want to hear from those community organizers and advocates about how best to do it. We may have ideas, they have ideas, let's figure out, and they may be different in each community. So anyway, that's we're just moving forward and trying to test all of these things. Just a quick question
about housing in the study areas. Mm-hmm. So what are you currently doing to well, for example, like the Yankee Stadium area, we know, we have data from 5 years ago when they were rezoned.
Yeah.
That rents have skyrocketed. So like there's 2-bedroom apartments that were before, $1,000 are now $1,900 and within 5 years, and people are being displaced.
Yeah.
And so what are you learning from that? Yeah. Especially since the Cromwell Jerome study area they're included in that impact area. So within a 5-year period, they could potentially, we don't know what your plan is going to look like yet, but could potentially impact those units again. And so when we're talking about rent stabilization, 74% of Community Board 4, which is in one of the study areas, N5, 84% N5, are 78% of Community Board 4 is actually rent stabilized. So when we look at that data, and we know that in the Yankee Stadium, we saw skyrocketing of 30% increases in rents, what are you doing from those learnings to sort of not have that happen again? And could you just actually give me an example of something that you are working on? Like, where are the workshops? Where are you doing them? How are you engaging people? How are you finding those everyday people walking down the street? And what is your team doing to do that?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about it as again, citywide, and not focus on any one neighborhood. So what the beginning process, a lot of this work planners do anyway, but it has not been, what has not been part of the planning process in DCP, HPD, or EDC is a more transparent process in this planning. So one of the first things we do is calling the project setup period, which is to collect as much quantitative data as possible, which what you were just describing. So in each neighborhood, we're calling it the neighborhood snapshot, which is all the dynamic, from our perspective, all the housing dynamics in a neighborhood. What buildings have rent regulations? How many units are there throughout the study area? Not just within the area, but of course, sort of surrounding area as well within the community board district. And what are the dates for the potential of those rent-regulated units terminated? Again, we're looking at incomes within the neighborhoods, just everything that would determine affordability in a neighborhood, the age of the housing stock, the type of, are they buildings majority of the buildings more than 50 units, less than 50 units, less than 20? So that we get a really good understanding of what the housing dynamics are in a neighborhood. So what we might do in East New York around preservation of existing units, particularly in small buildings in East New York, might look very different than the preservation strategy for a place like Jerome Corridor. So that's this neighborhood snapshot. Then the next step in that is to then begin meeting with the advocates who have a lot of information on the ground that we may not have from databases. And then we begin accumulating more information to be able to begin testing ideas about strategies for preservation and construction of new units. So it's a moving target. It's an ongoing dynamic, and the stuff we're doing in Jerome is just launching right now. So DCP is in charge of the Jerome Corridor strategy, and they've had, I think, like 3 workshops already for this first phase of calling it the discovery phase, which is just data collection, and CASA has been really involved in that. And when there was discrepancies at the beginning, and we were hoping that they're going to meet in the middle somewhere so that we can have joint, and maybe they don't even have to be joint workshops, but at least the information is put into the actual planning process itself.
So I understand that you have till 11:30. I want to make
Yeah.
sure the members of the board have a chance to ask questions, and obviously Sheila knows so much about all this. I'm sure that you will.
Yeah, no, these are great. This is exactly the kind of questions we're getting from community advocates and organizers.
I'm going to be brief, and I'm not good at being brief. Thank you very much for coming. I felt like you had a great sense of empathy for the board because of all the stakeholders that we have here, and it's similar to the cross-section of stakeholders that you have to think about.
I was picking that up by the questions that were being asked, but yes.
I'm a bricks and mortar kind of person, and so I'm always a big fan of things, being in the community in which you're dealing with, literally pop-up storefront. You're there, and I understand we've struggled a lot about just even the timing of our meetings because we have owners that are working, and then we have community members that are coming home from work, and trying to straddle that kind of overlap between the 3 p.m. to the 8 p.m. slot. You might have very unconventional hours, but one of the things I really liked and love to get more information about, or figure out how we all get more information about it, is that when you go into these communities, and whether it be in a pop-up storefront type of thing, how you get information out that you're there.
Yeah.
So as an owner, and particularly with preservation, which has a whole host of unknowns, particularly as people start to think about the next phases of rent-stabilized apartments, what's available to them as an owner. If you're present in the community, that probably is the best way to get information out to the various stakeholders in that community, and not just the person walking down the street getting their coffee, but chances are that person walking down the street getting their coffee might be a tenant or it might be a landlord.
That's right.
So that'd be just my only recommendation, is that literally you have a physical presence, and that can hopefully get both sides to the table. Both sides of the table.
I think
at the
that's
table.
a great idea, and that's actually on the table right now. And we're not sure where to place these offices. So I would
Community facility bonus.
Yeah. Yes.
You guys come on in, community facility.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yes. But there's the other one that you said was also kind of funny on the pop-up stuff, and we did a plan for a town in New Jersey, and community organizing that we did a pop-up planning studio, basically. So we did it for a week, so that it didn't matter when you were available. All you had to do was just walk down. So people would come during lunch or when they were shopping, and they'd come into the pop-up studio, and they'd give us comments. We had all ways of trying to get information from people, but it was a way that we could get the everyday person on the sidewalk.
All right, thank you so much. Final question?
Hi, Daniel.
Lay it on me.
No, I appreciate you coming, and I know we sometimes agree to disagree on some of the issues, but I do think there were some questions that we had asked HPD to come answer that I know you didn't get a chance to get through. So can someone then give us written answers to the questions that we posed to HPD? Sure. And the other thing is, I really appreciate your perspective on this, but as someone who's done this for a long time, people love to come to meetings and talk sometimes if it's culturally competent and in their communities and something they feel like they have power over.
Oh, that's why the workshops are so important.
Right. So I do feel like I appreciate your connection to community and community-based organizations. So I think shared. I just hope that you don't try to squeeze it so short, because people do like coming to meetings because they get the opportunity to have influence on their future of their community, and people care deeply in New York about their own communities. They've lived in them for 20, 30, 40 years. And if you could get us these answers to these questions, that would be great.
Yeah. No, I think the reason, maybe I won't say it anymore in my presentations, the reason I say is I'm very interested in implementation, and I'm interested in getting to some things done. And I know that there's people who just love meetings, but I also think that it's a responsibility for me, and what my commitment is to, like, if we're going to meet, this has to lead to something, and something tangible. So maybe I just need to reword how I present that. But that's why workshops are important, but that's why other means of engaging a variety of people who may not otherwise like to come to meetings should be considered as part of the engagement strategy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, other board topics? I know we sort of cut off the kayak discussion because we wanted to make sure we had a chance to hear from this community. So I don't know if there were any further questions now or discussion points.
I just have a request that since we did not get this before the meeting, I think we could talk about why, and maybe I'm going to need to read it and then have an opportunity to ask questions. And I feel like we should allow time either at our next meeting, whether it's a half an hour, to have Andrew answer questions if there are questions as we read through this.
I mean, my thought, the next meeting is going to be difficult because that's when we have presentations from the representatives from tenant groups, landlords groups, et cetera. That's a very long meeting. Certainly, again, I don't want to answer for you, but I presume if there are emailed questions that you'd be happy to answer them and share those with the full board.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if you have any questions, I certainly can. I mean, at the end of the day, if people are open to it and board members want to stay, I can, take the end of the day and
After the next meeting,
address.
you mean?
Yeah, after the groups have their chance to speak. I don't believe there'll be any representative from hotel owners, so there's a time slot there that we can certainly use. If you have any additional questions, I have no problem with that.
I would
Maybe that's the
appreciate it.
solution.
And I also appreciate the dialogue. Sometimes Sarah asks a question and it helps me think about something that I hadn't otherwise thought about. So I like the back and forth that the questioning allows us to do. So if we could do that next week, that would be great.
Sure, I have no problem with that. It's okay with you.
And I just want to sort of reflect back on when we hear sort of testimony from the administration about plans of planning and all of the new housing that's being built. I want us to always maintain the idea, like in the back of our heads, think about the data that we get around the income, the people who live in the buildings that are rent stabilized, which we have actual control over, and affecting 2.5 million people who are affected by rent stabilization. And I think that when we think about the new housing and who can live in that housing, and we think about our decision and who actually lives in that type of housing, in different communities where people can make anywhere from $18,000 a year to $40,000 a year, this is real. And so it's great that we're building new housing. It's great we're thinking about how do we engage communities to be in that process. But I also feel like it's at the end of the day, we have a current stock of housing, and if we continue to lose the kind of housing that we currently have, then building more housing is just sort of adding water to a bucket with a lot of holes, even though, we have a line item for buckets, so we can have, and so like just thinking about that, I think it's important, because if we lose sight of that, we're always going to think, well, more housing is being built, it's okay, people will have more choices, but people don't have a choice in rent stabilized, and we see it when people don't leave and the vacancies are so low, and so I just want to sort of highlight that, and it really stands out for me in a real thoughtful way, because we can actually affect how that housing is maintained and really think and look at both sides in a different way.
I was going to just ask a quick question. Does anyone know what the percentage of new housing versus preservation initiative in terms of the housing stock? Does anyone know? Isn't it majority?
Majority preservation.
100,000 total and 80,000 is new construction.
Preservation.
Yeah.
And the mayor's
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I was just curious. Yeah, I was been noticing that the preservation is a really big part of this.
Just a quick reminder, if you haven't filled out your menu, we're giving lunch tomorrow. Next meeting. Sorry, not tomorrow. And then just, if you could put your name on it, and then if you could pass them to Leon, and before you leave, that'd be great. And if you can't make a decision now, please email me.
So I have to apologize profusely. I was sort of intending to talk to everyone individually. I had a huge schedule change for work, and I can't make next week's meeting. So I would like to schedule individual meeting with tenants. I've reached out to some of the owners' representatives. I don't want people to think I don't think next week's meeting is important, because I think it's huge. But this is one of those work things that I can't change. And I talked to Andrew about, should we change the meeting? But that seemed very diva-like. And so, again, I would just like to personally apologize to everyone. I really feel awful that I can't be at the next meeting.
Could we actually take a vote as to whether we should move the meeting or not? Because I know you're saying that was diva-like, but I just feel like next week's meeting is probably one of the most critical meetings.
I mean, my plan was to watch the video, to reach out to individual tenant and landlord members so that I could ensure that I would hear all the information. I think it's also difficult for people who've been planning this. It's
Okay.
obviously when we plan this, I would never have planned it on something that I could not miss, but I think.
Yeah, no, I understand.
I also feel like it has to happen before the preliminary.
Oh, it has to. It has to happen
Yeah.
before that. Yeah, no, it's obviously absolutely crucial that people have a chance to present from the tenant and landlord perspective, chosen representatives before the preliminary vote, and then obviously we'll have our public meetings where we can hear from people individually. And again, my promise personally is that I would be happy to meet individually with anyone from any landlord's organization or tenant organization prior to the preliminary vote so that I have individual interaction. But I think in terms of figuring out an alternative time, it would be impossible at this stage. I think actually we couldn't at this stage.
No, we couldn't. Also, it wasn't just the board members, it was people presenting.
Yeah,
It's been on
exactly.
the ledger, and it's just not to try to organize that, and then if someone can't make it, it's just not fair.
All right, thank you all so much. Again, I know today was a difficult meeting because we didn't have it but it's been a complicated process here because of the reweighting. Enormous care obviously was taken with the report, as it always is, but even greater level of care was taken this year because of the reweighting to make sure that the numbers are perfectly accurate. And I think I had great confidence that many thoughtful questions would emerge from this group, and obviously everyone did ask thoughtful questions, so thank you all so much.
Do we need a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
You want to, yeah, you like